Now, Rowan might be away, but he's always on the clock for us. Doesn't matter what country it is. He sent through an incredible interview with Nigel Farage. They discuss Brexit, chaos, Britain and Boris in crisis, and how Nigel would do things better if he became PM. Take a look.
And now I'm delighted to welcome back to Outsiders, Nigel Farage. Nigel, how are you?
Well, not very happy with Australia. This Steve Smith bloke keeps smashing us. But actually, the fact we've lost the Ashes is the least of my concerns.
Exactly.
In this country at the moment, we have been through, since I was last with you, just an unprecedented few weeks. I mean, we even finished up yesterday with a court in Scotland saying that Boris Johnson may have lied to the Queen. We have had, in our Parliament, scenes that I would expect from South America, where there was a coup taking place.
Exactly. Well, I'd go even further than that, Nigel, because I love British comedy, as you do. We share that love of British comedy. Can I ask you about Boris Johnson's political strategy? Is it more Fawlty Towers chaos, or is it more Sir Edmund Blackadder so cunning you could put a tail on it and call it a weasel? Which is it?
Do you know, yes, I do love Blackadder. He thought that whatever he tried to do, if it didn't succeed, which it probably wouldn't, given the makeup of our globalist Remainer Parliament, that it wouldn't matter, because there'd be a general election.
Right.
All right? And because we've got this cretinous piece of legislation called the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, put in by those geniuses, Clegg and Cameron, we now have an unprecedented situation where we have a Prime Minister who has lost his first 6 parliamentary votes in a row, who, far from having a majority, is running at about -30 in Parliament. It's a zombie parliament. It doesn't function. It doesn't work. And therefore, the Prime Minister says the game's up. Let's have an election. I don't think for a minute he thought Corbyn would block it, but he did. And all the parties got together, including 21 Conservatives. Well, I say Conservatives pretty loosely.
Yes.
And they used our exit from the European Union on the 31st of October. They used a piece of law to stop us from leaving with a clean break on that date, and so being, stop a general election. And here's where Corbyn's been clever. Theresa May told us 108 times we would leave the European Union on the 29th of March, as law said. And you know something? For a bit, even I believed her. Well, I did. I mean, you know, initially, new Prime Minister, gave an amazing speech at Lancaster House, said all the things that I've been saying for 20 years. I believed her. And of course, we didn't leave on the 29th of March. And on the 30th of March, people woke up in this country and thought, what's happened? So into that void, I launched the Brexit Party. You know, we've been failed with the establishment. We've got to do something different. Then the date got kicked down the road to October the 31st. And the expectation in this country is that we are leaving on the 31st of October. I've met people at service stations off motorways. I said, well, how are you? Oh, I'll be better on the 31st of October, Mr. Farage, because they believe we're leaving on that day. Exactly. And Boris, of course, his whole election as Conservative leader, and since, big Boris bravado, we're leaving on the 31st of October, do or die. I would rather die in a ditch than extend the date beyond. And of course, the truth is now, his chances of getting us out on any basis for the 31st of October are vanishingly small. And this is what Corbyn knows. Corbyn knows that when people wake up on the 1st of November, if we're still members of the European Union, twice in one calendar year, the Conservative Party will have marched us up to the top of the hill and marched us back down again, and their poll ratings will fall. So Corbyn actually, I can't stand his politics, he's actually played this quite cleverly, and Boris is now in a very, very tight fix.
So let's talk about that tight fix, because, as you said, He prorogued Parliament, and then that was challenged in the courts. An English court said that's fine, he's within his rights to challenge, to prorogue, but the Scottish court said, no, he's broken the law, and yesterday there was talk of Boris Johnson going to prison.
And the reason was the government didn't put in a defence.
Right.
Had the government put in a defence, where the Prime Minister said, I called for a Queen's speech to announce new legislation, at the centrepiece of which is my Brexit proposal for the country, I don't believe in those circumstances a Scottish judge would have ruled in the way that he did. So that rings another question. Is this government competent?
Well, I think we're saying that it's struggling with its competency, clearly. Now, the big question I would ask, opening the papers here in London this morning, they're attacking you. Now, Boris Johnson wrote a great biography of Winston Churchill. You would have thought he would have learned from Churchill that you get allies. You bring your allies in and you choose who the enemy is. You bring whatever allies in to defeat that enemy. He has turned against you. We spoke in Australia about why it was necessary to have some kind of pact between your party, the Brexit Party, and the Tories, so that people in the north of England who cannot stomach the Tories would vote for you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Look, what I've done since I was last with you is I've launched a really big national newspaper advertising campaign, unprecedented for a political party, and it's all been on the basis of my offer to Boris.
Great.
And my offer to Boris is, you go for a clean break Brexit, forget a new European treaty. They're going to stuff you every time. We'll be trapped in it for years and years and years. Go for a clean break Brexit. I'll be your best friend. We will stand aside in large parts of the country. In fact, more than that, I will endorse your candidates and tell my voters, look, you may not like the party, but for goodness sake, please, for this one-off election, do it. We would then stand against the Labour Party in parts of the country that culturally will never vote Conservative, but haven't got a problem with me. And the deal is brilliant in this sense. Forget what I think. Professor John Curtis, who is the absolute gold standard of political judgment in Britain, says that would deliver Boris Johnson a majority in Parliament of at least 40 seats. So we get a majority for Brexit, we can do it. We crush the Marxist Corbyn, and Boris becomes the national hero. I mean, what's not to like?
Absolutely, and I've always said that I can see Nigel Farage as part, if not in Downing Street, which we talked about, certainly very close to Downing Street in that scenario. So I can't for the life of me understand why Boris is deliberately attacking you personally. Yeah,
one wonders whether that was him or just some little sort of straight out of Oxford University press officer. I mean, I don't know the answer to that. But I'll tell you why they're rejecting it. Because Boris has two choices. One is a clean break Brexit. And, of course, we're being told, that lorries would queue on motorways for weeks, we'd all starve and die, that kind of thing. Project Fear Mark II. Or he goes back to Mrs May's withdrawal agreement, which is a new European treaty, which, of course, 3 times was rejected by the House of Commons. And Boris is trying to amend the bit around the Irish border, the so-called backstop. And he seems to think that if he gets a deal on the backstop, brings it back, Parliament votes it through, and the country breathes a collective sigh of relief and says, isn't it marvellous? Boris got the deal, and we've left. What I am now convinced of is that Boris is 100% going for that treaty, but looking for an amendment, and that's why he can't even countenance talking to me. He's looking then to get back into the Conservative Party, the 21... They're called One Nation, this group. They should be rebranded No Nation, because they want us to be part of the European Union.
Exactly.
And that's where he's going. And the truth of it is that centre-right politics faces a choice. He faces a choice. You either go back to the Conservative Party being the broad church, or you accept my premise, which is there is a major realignment of politics going on, and you accept that the Brexit Party, actually, and the Brexit Party voters are where most of your voters are.
Absolutely. Well, I think you're right there. Now, I've been in London for 24, 48 hours, and I've gone straight to the source of political judgment, which any good tourist does, which is a black cabbie.
Of course.
They have the knowledge, and of course I asked the question about Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson, and the Cockney cabbie immediately wants you in power, wants a clean break. They're fed up. And the thing I keep hearing is people, even if they initially voted Remain, are now so fed up with the whole process, they want a clean break, get it over and get on with their lives. Yep. You mentioned Operation Yellowhammer, which is this big scare thing about all the terrible things that will happen, everything from Ebola through to heaven knows what. But it's rubbish, isn't it?
It's cobblers. Yeah. Absolute cobblers. I mean, if we leave the European Union's customs union, it means that for goods going out of the country, coming into the country, there is one more piece of paper to fill in. Or I say paper. It's all done on a cell phone. I mean, the world's a different place. You know, you go to Detroit, you watch the lorries going back and forth across the bridge to Canada. You know, a lot of them are bringing tariff goods in and out. There's no barriers, there's no delays. No, it is, but again, you see, it's the whole establishment. It isn't just the MPs in Westminster. Virtually the whole of the civil service. You know, in this part of Westminster we're in now, they are, almost to a man and woman, want the established status quo to remain as it is. So they keep trying to terrify us that these awful, dreadful things will happen. It's not working.
And this is the bigger picture, Nigel, is that we really are at a critical point in history where it is the individual who believes in their country, their own nation, versus this elite, technocratic, bureaucratic system. You represent the average person in the street who just wants their Britain, their England, their homeland.
Yeah.
What's that feel like?
Yeah, and democracy.
And democracy.
Because what is so interesting about what's happening here is the devaluation of democracy as a principle. You know, I touched on losers' consent the other week with you. That without losers' consent, how can civilized politics exist?
And they're not consenting. They're fighting in the courts. They're fighting at every step to delay Brexit.
And you know what? The Democrats have been doing it in America. What was the Mueller report about? A refusal to accept that Trump could possibly have won by fair means. So we're seeing a lot of this across the Western world. And it seems that there is a new politics, a new globalist politics, that believes that it itself is morally superior and better to those with a different opinion.
Now, as I said, this is a historic moment. Now, let's just fast forward to, let's just say there is a general election, either before or after October 31st, who knows?
Yeah.
Let's just say the Brexit Party wins. You win government. What happens that next day?
Well, it'll be a big celebration.
No doubt about that. Which pub? You've got to let us in on a few secrets. What would a Nigel Farage government look like? And
the first thing to say, I think the way this is shaping up is the general election, which they can't delay forever. It's coming. I think the general election will be a sort of a la carte menu. You can go for revocation of Article 50 with the Liberals, second referendum with Labour, a new European treaty with Boris, or a clean break Brexit with me. That, I think, is the choice we're going to get. I don't for a minute doubt that in those circumstances, if the public perceive that Boris has done a bad deal, this is the key. If Boris comes back and convinces the public it's a good deal, he'll win the election. Now, I know it's an absolute stinker. If the public think it's a bad deal, then who, you know, as you say, all bets are off. Anything could happen. Look, I just think that, you know, what we need is a government that resolves this as quickly as possible. As quickly as possible. What we need is a government that recognises there is a quite serious economic downturn coming in Europe and possibly across much of the rest of the globe as well. And my big fear is I think Europe is going into a gentle but downward deflationary spiral. We think of Japan and just all those lost years in the economy. That's where Europe's headed at the moment. So we need a government with some real innovation, with some real smart ideas, you know, about growth, energy. We need a government that recognises the extraordinary abilities of 5.4 million people living in this country, acting as sole traders, running their own small businesses, and of course, for them, the EU globalism has just showered them with rules and regulations. And they're some of the first basic things that a government needs to do. But we need a government, above all, that begins to restore some faith in our ancient institutions. And I think the truth of it is that our system of government isn't fit for the 21st century.
And how would you change that?
It doesn't work anymore. We have an electoral system that just cuts out millions of people. You know, if you're a Conservative living in, you know, an ex-coalfield in the north, you're never going to win. You know, if you're a socialist living in parts of the soft southern home counties, you know. So I think electoral reform to engage more people, very, very important. Scrapping the disgusting House of Lords. You know, we reached a point. I mean, there are about 600 people in there who are mates of Cameron and Blair's. No, I'm being serious.
Yes.
And that's the upper chamber. We've got to get rid of that.
And that's the elite class of bureaucrats who get rewarded for being...
And they all live in London.
Yes.
They're not representative of the country as a whole. That, I also, and this is perhaps a bit more contentious, but I also think that what the referendum showed back in 2016 was an appetite to engage, because we had this huge turnout of people. So I personally think that the ability to exercise direct democracy, if there is a really major issue that people say, people feel, we want to say on this, not just those in Westminster. These are some of the ideas that I've got for fundamental political change. We have to restore faith and trust in the system. I get anger at the moment at the way our politicians are behaving, but I also detect, even in those who have traditionally believed in democracy, they're beginning to ask, is it worth it? Does it have a future? And that's not a good place to be. I said the other day in a speech, I worry we're entering a dark place. And we have to do something to restore faith in our institutions, faith in how we're governed, to try and re-establish some degree of trust between the governors and the governed. And I think that is a very, very major challenge for this country.
Nigel Farage, if Boris Johnson doesn't do some kind of deal with your Brexit party before an election, are you up for the fight to win the prime ministership for yourself?
Do you want to hold my jacket?
Fantastic. Looking forward to it. Great times ahead, and all the best of luck. Nigel Farage, thanks so much for coming back on Outsiders, and good luck.
It's my favourite show. Of course I'm here.
Excellent. Fantastic. Thank you very much.